Hello and welcome. I am Stephanie Green, part of the Festival Organizing Committee. This year's festival is made possible by the generous support of our festival sponsors: Brattleboro Community Television, Jenny Altschuler and Barry Green, Elizabeth Catlin, the Stepansky Family Trust, the Vermont Humanities Council, and poets and writers. We would also like to thank our advertisers, and we encourage you to support them. The festival is run, as you probably know, entirely by volunteers, but has very real expenses. So we encourage you to make a donation to one of the donation boxes sometime this weekend, or you can use the QR code to donate online through our website. Please take a moment now to turn the ringers off on your cell phones, but feel free to take photos and share them with us on social media. So, I'm going to introduce these wonderful writers together, and then I'm going to butt out, and they're going to talk to each other in a most interesting way about their books. Betsy Lerner is the author of Shred Sisters. She's also the author of The Bridge Ladies, The Forest for the Trees, which many of you may know, and Food and Loathing. With Temple Grandin, she's also the co-author of the New York Times bestseller, Visual Thinking, The Hidden Gifts of People Who Think in Pictures, Patterns, and Abstractions. She received an MFA from Columbia University in poetry, where she was selected as one of Penn's emerging writers. She also received a Tony Godwin Publishing Prize for editors. After working as an editor for 15 years, she became an agent and is currently a partner with Dunau, Carlson, and Lerner Literary Agency. Shred Sisters is the story of the immensely charming, funny, and dangerous Olivia, whose mental illness increasingly confounds her family. The story is narrated by her serious younger sister, Amy, who white-knuckles her way to adulthood, as the family keeps having to, quote, recalibrate the idea of normal as it shifted, end quote. The book is an immersive, even compulsive read, and resonates long after its ending. Please give a warm welcome to Betsy Lerner. And Jonas Hassen Khemiri was born in Stockholm and is the author of 6 novels, 7 plays, and a collection of essays, short stories, and plays. His work has been translated into more than 25 languages. He has received the August Prize for Fiction, a Village Voice Obie Award for Best Script. In 2017, he became the first Swedish writer to have a short story published in The New Yorker. Khemiri's novel, The Family Clause, was awarded the French Prix Medici and was a finalist for the National Book Award. Khemiri moved to New York in 2021 for a Cullman Fellowship at the New York Public Library and currently teaches in the Creative Writing Program at NYU. In 2023, he was a Ben Bellett Distinguished Visiting Writer at Bennington College. The Sisters is his first novel written in English. Fredrik Backman wrote in The New Yorker that The Sisters is a classic story about sibling rivalry, one of the best novels I've ever read about the complexities of mixed heritage. It is a huge, end quote. It is a huge and marvelous novel about, among other things, the Mikkola sisters, who are half Swedish, half Tunisian, and their interactions with the narrator, Jonas, who is also of mixed heritage. They labor under the burden of a curse that promises everything they love will be taken from them. In an interview, Khemiri said, "A curse is just a story trying to predict the future," and notes that stories can be incredibly powerful. The Sisters is a delightful exploration of the power of story. Please welcome Jonas Khemiri. Okay. One has a slide, one has a button. There you go. Okay.
Testing. Can
Do
you hear us?
me? Yes, perfect.
Well, I thought I would kick it off by saying, why are we here, the two of us, why were we paired together? Obviously, our novels both have the word sisters in them.
And that's about it.
That is about it. You started writing in your 20s. I wrote this novel in my 60s. You are very tall, and I am very short. male, female. So I think our conversation is going to be to find out what we have and have not in common about writing. And I thought I would kick it off because I'm so fascinated that you write plays and fiction, why you think people read fiction, why you think people go to plays, and do you think about your audience as you write?
Thank you so much. I mean, I just want to say that I'm really happy to be here. I tend to think less and less about the audience. I found when I was a young writer, I was really hyper-focused on, I thought I could write a specific sentence that could create a certain emotion in a future audience. So I would spend days, weeks, sometimes years waiting for that perfect sentence. It's not a very helpful strategy if you want to be a creative person to do that, because you're ultimately, I think you end up in a position where you try to control things rather than inviting play and fun. So I find, I've been writing for now more than 20 years, and I find that I do my best work when I think less of what kind of thing I want to create, what kind of emotion I want to create in the audience, and more trying to explore something. I go back and forth between plays and novels. I love writing novels because in a novel you can't control time. Like in a play, if this were a theater scene, I could control when people would say something, and oftentimes I hide like actors in the audience. I like to play around, but we could also, if this were a theater, we could lock the doors and do weird experiments on you. You know, we could do that thing. Like but a novel is something else. We don't have that kind of agency. We have much more agency when we are readers, right? And the beautiful thing when we are reading, we are actually controlling the speed of the story. We can choose to know, well, this is not my story. No, I'm not in the mood for this. And your question makes me think of one of the first times when my mom saw someone reading my book out in the public, out in the wild. She called me on my cell phone. This was in Stockholm. She was like, I see it. I was like, excuse me? I see someone reading the book. Oh, wow. That's like, walk up to her. Does she look happy? My first book had just been published. And okay, she was like, I'll call you back. And then she walked up to her and sat like opposite of her and kind of, looked. And then afterwards I called her because she never called me back, and I thought it was weird. And I was like, what did you, because my mom talks to everyone, like, did you strike up a conversation? Was it, did she say it was the best book ever written? And then it turned out that my mom just told that she just sat opposite of her, like smiling the way my mom smiles. And then somewhere between two subway stops, this person who was probably tired, just like slowly started nodding off. And my mom described it as being so frustrated, like that's, I was about to wake her up, which would also have been a fun experience for that person. So I think much less about the how people react, and much more about how I can explore this story in the best possible way. When you have multiple identities as well. You have your agent self, you have your non-fiction self, and your fictional self, which sounds fun to have a fictional self or fiction self. How do you choose which one to invite?
I don't think I ever made any conscious decisions about choosing what I would write. I wrote diaries as a child and was always very private and secretive about my writing. And then I wrote poetry, which I was also very private about. I did eventually get an MFA in poetry, and that almost destroyed me. But then... Why? I had a breakdown, honestly. And I couldn't handle being in that fishbowl of an MFA program, which was highly competitive. It was at Columbia, and I was a person who didn't even imagine that any poem I wrote would be in a book. That's how far away I was from any sort of professionalism when I went into it. And the kids were really competitive and really into it, and Oh, I was just quite devastated, and was already had a struggle with depression for many years, so it just, I crashed there. I did go back and finish, which was something of a victory, but I became an editor really because I think I just pushed the writer in me down very far, and I took a great deal of joy and accomplishment in working on other people's books and editing their books and bringing them to the public, marketing them, publicizing them, giving them titles, finding jackets. So I wrote my first book when I was almost 40. It was like she came back. And but very unexpectedly, I wrote an advice book to writers from an editor's point of view. And it wasn't a poem, it wasn't a novel, it was really I don't want to say it was quite of a how-to book, it was really about how writers think and writers' personalities. So, I think that she was just always inside me, and it just took a lot of time before I gained enough confidence, and my ego got a little bit bigger, and sort of how it happened.
So interesting how you say that you had to push her down and then she came back up. I think that's a process that we often, I also teach MFA students, and I think a lot about how it's helpful to be around other creative people, but I also think it can be really complicated as soon as you see other talented people succeed. And I can really relate to that. I was also writing for many, many years without telling anyone. It was almost like a personal secret because I went to a school where a lot of people were writers, or a lot of people aspired to be writing, and a lot of guys had berets, that kind of thing. And they would just talk about their poetry and their, and I'm like, I could never do that because I came from a home where we valued books, but no one, I never told anyone I wanted to write because I had to focus on making sure that we had money. It just didn't seem, and these beret-wearing people, they spoke about it with such an ease that it made me jealous also. But ultimately, I also think that the way that they just talked about their writing helped me because I realized that was just possible, that it would be okay, it could be okay for someone to say that they had dreams. So for the longest time, I just pushed him down, and then I published my first book, and then I've been living as a writer ever since. But I found it really helpful to have multiple forms in order to keep my creativity happy. So whenever I get stuck in a novel, I could easily just pivot and go towards writing plays. And I always tell my students that it's really good to have one main form, the form that has changed you the most. The reason why I'm here is because I read books that changed the way I see the world. I've never experienced the same kind of, you read something and you walk out to the world and it just feels different. I haven't had that with plays, movies, and I've written in those forms too. So that's why I see myself as a novelist. I always tell my students, try to write in the form that has changed you the most. But it's great to have one or two kind of spares, extra forms that you care less about. And I wonder if that was your impression when you kind of came back to writing. It sounds almost like a craft book. Not that you care less about it, but it was a way for you to remind yourself maybe that writing can also be less pressuring. Was that your experience when you wrote that book?
Well, I really like what you said about writing that has less pressure on it, because even though I didn't write that book until I was 40, I kept diaries all throughout my 20s, wrote every day. I blogged for a decade, every day except the weekends. I wrote 6 screenplays and had the perfect Hollywood close call that then doesn't happen but keeps you hooked. What a nightmare that is. But and now even I actually I'm a TikTok content creator. I am always creating I am always writing one way or another, and I'm often writing in my head as well. So, but for me, it was an identity issue. And if you met me on a train or a plane and said, "What do you do?" I would say, "I'm an editor," or "I'm a literary agent." I I would never be able to say W-R-I-T-E-R. So I wonder if I meet you on the train and I say, well, what do you do? What's your answer?
I always say that I write. No, yeah.
But that's a step away, right?
Yeah, it's a step away. And whenever I said that, the person listening could go, well, you're actually not doing that right now. Now you're talking. But I wonder what it is. I think maybe it's because that category was just full of, I don't know. I never met anyone who wrote when I was young. And like the books I read changed my life, but I never knew that there were actual people who wrote them.
So what are the first few books that opened your eyes and your soul?
I remember finding Don Quixote, and not knowing that it was a classic, not knowing that other people might know Cervantes. I found it at the library in Stockholm, and it felt like I discovered that book, and no one else knew of it. I remember that feeling of like, and it's a book full of stories and authenticity, he plays around a lot with authenticity in that book. So I would say like Don Quixote was one early one. Another one is Astrid Lindgren, a famous Swedish writer who wrote, she's most famous for Pippi Longstocking here. But she wrote a beautiful book that just anyone with a heart or a soul should read, a young adult novel called Brothers Lionheart. I think that was my first impulse, where I just realized what a book can do to you. My mother read it out loud before I could read it. She read it out loud, and I had I was an older brother, I had two younger brothers, and it's about two brothers, and it starts off, no spoiler, or well, kind of a spoiler, but it starts off with one of the brothers dying, but it's not the brother who we think. And even though it's a book for kids or for young adults, just to be in the presence of a writer who says, well, death exists, but there's something after death, and I will take you there, and I will lead you, and I will comfort you, and this life is not everything. I just remember that as being just remarkable. I think that was the first time when I realized that maybe one day, if I could put words in an order that would make someone feel this or something similar, then my life will never not have meaning. That's, a first impulse came when I read that book, because I keep reading it now. I read it to my children. I have two young boys, and was just as moved when I read it. It was remarkable. I read the first chapter. I started crying. My oldest child also started crying, and then my youngest son looked at us, and I think he was a little bit almost disturbed by the fact that the two older boys in his family were just weeping. And then he leaned forward and he says, "Dad, look at my eyes. They're so incredibly dry." Because he was he was moved, but he was not moved in that way, kind of. But it's still a book that it holds up, and it's a remarkable book about that death is never the end. Yeah. Mm.
Well,
what was yours?
I would say definitely for me, Diary of a Young Girl, Anne Frank's diary. That's when I started writing my diaries. And we had a ranch house, and I was very sad that we didn't have an attic. I found a crawl space under the stairs, and I took blankets in there and a pillow, and I still remember an extension cord and a little lamp. And I bought my Am I there? And I went to the stationer's store, and most of them were, pink. And I bought one that was tan because I was going to write a serious diary. And then,
so much more serious.
Deeply serious, though mostly I was writing about how much I didn't like my older sister, which, of course, 65 years later, Shred Sisters. But then really the book that changed my life was Sylvia Plath's Ariel. I still remember the first poem, Morning Song. Am I going out? There we go. Love set you going like a fat gold watch. And this was my grandmother's fat gold watch, which I was obsessed with as a child. I don't know if there was a connection, but then, of course, as I continued to read the poems that became very raw and savage, like Daddy, of course, it was, I mean, here I was 15 years old, you know, living in the suburbs outside of New Haven. That book struck me between the eyes, and I don't even think I understood half of it, but there was something about the power of the language, the intensity, and also this is before I knew that Sylvia Plath took her life, before I knew that she was a confessional poet, so that was incredibly powerful to me. And then the other book that was the first book that I stayed up until 2, 3 in the morning reading was In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. And I still have a very serious fear of home invasion, but the propulsion of that prose and that story and the use of suspense and psychology and the writing style, that just swept me up. And I actually, as an agent, I have a sweet spot for true crime, which I'm sure goes right back to that, yeah.
Could I ask you where Olivia came from?
Olivia? Oh, I
As
guess.
a fictional character?
Yes.
We're making a huge time leap now.
Right. Well, in my book, there are these two sisters. One is very dutiful. She's a scientist. And the other sister becomes clear that she has a mental illness. And Amy is the dutiful sister, and everybody thinks that I'm Amy. Also, my book is written in the first person, so people often think it's very autobiographical. I was diagnosed with bipolar illness when I was a teenager, and Olivia is very much written from the inside out. I'm really trying to write about someone who remains undiagnosed, refuses medication, and more importantly, her impact on the family. And I don't think I could have written this novel when I was in my 20s because I was going through it. But in my 60s, what I really saw, and having a child, made me realize the impact that my behavior had on my family. It took a long time for me to really reckon with that. And I think I'm very much Amy and Olivia. And, you know, the woman who did the jacket somehow really got it exactly right with these two halves. But on the other hand, also, unlike me, Olivia is hypomanic. She's someone who's mostly manic and just spirals very infrequently. She's also very charismatic and athletic and very beautiful, and she's a tremendously charismatic con artist. So she's also very much a work of fiction, but the ways in which that illness can be so slippery and difficult to diagnose, and how it really can, I don't want to say destroy a family, but impact a family's ecosystem. That's who I wanted to write about, that girl.
I can really relate to that. I often feel like when I write fiction that I create characters who I think are much more different than I am. And then gradually, the more I write them, I realize that I've just hidden parts of me in them.
Okay, so wait, I have to ask you. You said you're one of 3 brothers.
Yes.
You've written a novel about 3 sisters.
Yes. Coincidentally.
So where did these women come from?
There's like the professional answer, I can just give you the professional answer, is that, you know, like they appeared as voices in my head. And that's actually true. When I write, oftentimes my characters appear as voices. And it was very clear that these 3 women were different characters because they sounded very differently in my head. So the first one was Ina, who's the oldest one. And I think I share a lot of characteristics with Ina being the oldest. Ina her voice was very, almost like staccato-ish, you know, it was like up, 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 up. She's very structured. She basically finds a lot of security in systems, in Excel sheets, in graphs, just like controlling things. And she's that kind of older sister who would unasked contact her younger sisters with some like advice, you know, about like insurance, you know, that kind of sister. And I have that. I do that with my brothers, you know, uncalled, you know, stock tips. You know, and so I saw myself in her. But then when I started writing her, I realized, oh, she actually has younger sisters. And then I started hearing Evelyn, the middle sister, and she was. She has some kind of Olivia traits. She has almost like cameo-less. She's almost like a chameleon in the way that she can adjust her voice and become anyone. And and I remember writing her and realizing, oh, I think I have that trait too. I think I can do that. Like I have this is one version of me. This is Jonas sitting on stage holding a microphone version. But the other day I talked to my students. I told them some random story about time when I was drunk and I bit my friend in his shoulder and they just looked really terrified. I was like, yeah, that's also me. I was in my 20s, I was drunk, I bit him really, yeah, I mean, that happens, right? And they were like, no, it doesn't happen. but I had that too, like this someone who can change my voice, I have that too. And the youngest sister is Anastasia. She is a person who, when I heard her voice, she was like raspy and she always wanted more out of life. She kept filling life with like music or drugs or anything, religion towards the end of the book, just to make life feel survivable. And when I wrote about her, I realized, well, I was definitely that person. Maybe more when I was younger. When I bit people, I was more Anastasia. But so I saw myself, the more I wrote about them, the more I saw myself in them. But the structure of the book is that every other chapter is about these three sisters, and every other chapter just is a personal memory of mine. So it's kind of half fiction, half nonfiction. But the more we read, we realize that the nonfiction and the fictional sections, they actually start to blend. So the sisters pop up in my memories, and I pop up in their stories. And I think that is why I had to write it in English, because I couldn't write the personal memories in Swedish. Swedish is my mother tongue. These personal memories were just too painful to write in Swedish. I've been trying for 25 years. I couldn't get them out in Swedish. But the weird thing, once I started writing them in English, it was easy.
What gave you permission in our beautiful English language?
That's a great question. I realized that it was a way for me to make it impossible to be perfect. Yeah, because I think that once we have the idea that we can be perfect, it's impossible to create anything. And sometimes I've ended up, when I write in Swedish, sometimes I aim for perfection and I can't write anything. But I had this rule when I wrote in English. I told myself, I'm not allowed to look up. If there's a word I don't know it. So I never use a dictionary. I just wrote with my, my kids like to remind me that I have an accent every other day, because I've always have an accent, because English is not my mother tongue. But what if it's okay to create from a place of non-perfection, of imperfection? You were like, no. maybe that's where we do our best work, when we are putting ourselves in a position where it's actually impossible to be perfect. So I think that was one of the starting points. Another reason I think why I like to write in English is because I grew up speaking a lot of English. I used English as kind of an escape pod when I didn't feel at home in Swedish or in Sweden. And I like the expansiveness of English. You have so many words. You have so many words. I remember writing in English feeling like this is like an all-inclusive buffet, it's just sauce everywhere, and it's not very tasty, but it's just messy. It's just everywhere, and also as a European writing in English, there are so many different. You could choose the Germanic word, you could choose the I speak French as well. There's so many options, so I felt free in English. That's what happened when I wrote in English, and then it was interesting because when I had written the book in English, my Swedish publisher were like, what are we going to do now? I was like, well, maybe I can write it again in Swedish. And then I thought the personal sections would be really hard to write in Swedish, but it was super easy. So sometimes we have to we have to get lost in order to find ourselves. So the the personal sections, writing them in Swedish felt like a relief, strangely. So that's how the book came to be.
Wow, that's fascinating. I guess I wanted to follow up by asking if you dream in English.
I don't think I dream in any language, actually. Yeah, I've noticed that I also write. I have a diary, and I go back and forth between English and Swedish. But I noticed that when I'm angry, I tend to use English for whatever reason, or frustrated. So maybe there's something about, I don't know. I think it's also important to remember that English is maybe the most powerful language in the world. So maybe I used English to gain some authority. I'm convinced that I would not have had the courage to write a 600-page book in Swedish. Because I've always wanted to write a book that was kind of long enough. I wanted to write a book that could kind of stand on its own. And I'm very pleased that I have achieved this goal now after 22 years as a writer. Like it could just like chill. I just like that. And I also wanted to have a book where kind of the title would fit kind of horizontally, so I had to have a very short title. But I also think it's important whenever we talk about languages to remember that there is a linguistic power hierarchy behind these languages. And I don't think I would have given myself the authority to play with English if I had come from a language that had less power. I'm also coming from a European Swedish language tradition. So maybe that makes it possible for me to play around, or to do what this language can do best. And the expansiveness is something that I love about the English language. Have you ever considered writing in another language?
Sadly, no. No. But I think for me, poetry is a different language in some way. And I was very encouraged by my editor to flex that a little bit more in Shred Sisters. I am someone who likes economy almost more than anything, and speed. And getting back to Truman Capote in a way, I really like to turn pages. And so I think that when she gave me the permission when she said, oh, these passages are really beautiful, we could have a few more of them if you don't mind, And so those few sentences that are sprinkled throughout the book are the things that I'm most proud of. Yeah. Even though I did manage to write an entire novel, those go right back to really my roots as a writer.
Yeah. Something I found fascinating was that you were able to open the book with such a strong scene. And sometimes when we're reading, we're not going to go into the specific, but it's one of those scenes where you start the book and you realize that this scene is so strong that I can never, it's really hard to stop reading, basically. But you ground us in the present, but you keep going back into the past without losing the tension and the momentum of the presence. How did you do that?
That's very nice, thank you. I have to credit my editor with a lot of that. It wasn't my original first scene. I did actually, that was my decision to put it first eventually, but I actually overwrite, and that's one of my great sins as a writer. And I also wrote the novel in 7 months. I was writing first a half an hour, and then I was writing 5 hours a day until my hands were cramping. And it came out of me so fast, but I think she cut about 80 pages. And most of those 80 pages were backstory for every minor character, because I love backstory. I love, if I meet you, I want to know right away, where are you from? Do you have siblings?
We met last night, and she did it to me. Right? We met, and then 4 seconds after we met, you were like, so do you have real sisters? I was like, it's a long and complicated story. You were like, yeah, tell me.
Yeah, so I think I think also have a screenwriter's, I love screenwriting, and weirdly, I think it connects to poetry because, again, the concision of language and the economy. So I think it moves quickly, really, because and as a reader, I want to know what happens next. I'm very impatient. I hate surprises. That's sort of how I am. And although I do like books that are slow and meditative and deep, but just I think as a writer, that appeals to me. And I don't think about what I'm going to write. Writing is how I think. So they're sort of one and the same.
And focusing on speed, I mean, it's interesting to hear you say that. I saw the new Paul Thomas Anderson movie last night, and it's a movie that constantly is in, basically from the first scene until the end, it's as if the director looks us in the eyes and says, I know you're busy, I will not bore you for 1 second, but this movie is going to be 3 hours long. You know, and that quality in a work of art is really peculiar. Like, I know we're all about to die. I know we're running out of time. I mean, here today, but also our bodies, we're running out of time. We're all going to die. I will value you for showing up here today, but also in my book, or in your book, or in the Paul Thomas. I will value you for going to, what is the name of that beautiful cinema? Yes, like we were maybe 8 people there last night, but Paul Thomas Anderson Spears was there, and he said, I will value your time here, even though it will take quite a long time. But that tendency, that ability in an artist to say that I will value your time, but I will still not be afraid of using like a bigger canvas. I just love that. In the books that have changed me the most, I think a lot of them, one of the books that I read before starting The Sisters was Tolstoy's War and Peace. And one of the things that I was amazed by, but there were moments when I was a bit frustrated because it felt over-researched, or that I mean, it's a marvelous novel, but even when I was bored at times during some of the war scenes, the chapters were short enough so I kept going. And that was something that I tried to mimic in this book. I mean, not comparing myself with Tolstoy, of course, but like that, just stealing. I think if you're trying to build something, if you're trying to write something, just to steal or be influenced by the form of a work of art that you really admire can be really helpful. So that's what I tried to copy. And I mean, this is my longest, twice the size of my previous novel, but it's the first book that writers come up to me and they tell me how quickly they read it.
Oh, wow.
And I never know what to answer. Like, I read it in 2 weeks. Okay.
It's amazing.
Great. But it says, I mean, I think it goes back to time also, that time seems to be I mean, it's also part of the structure of the book, that time is like central, almost like a character in the book.
I read War and Peace last year, and it was because I had to read an 800-page manuscript by a client. And after that, I said, I'm not reading any more 800-page manuscripts until I read War and Peace, because I am going to my grave, and I want to do it. And in college, I think I read Anna Karenina 3 times in a row. I was so obsessed with that book, and I thought I'd never relate to War and Peace. Yeah. And what I was shocked by, I always thought I would like I call it war and parlor. Mm-hmm. I thought I would like the parlor scenes. I actually loved the war scenes more, and I think that is also about age. But I agree with you, those short chapters were the key. He kept turning, and just going back to the Paul Thomas Anderson movie, you didn't say whether you liked it or not, but the editing was fantastic, and I think maybe because I've been an editor for so many years, and really I am a literary agent, but I'm an editor in agent's clothing. Really, what I love to do is edit, and I think that whether it's structure, whether it's a space break, or whether it's just a line ending, you know, all of these tools that a writer has to make something. To make a reader attached to it, whether it's fast or slow, those tools fascinate me. And so I guess I would ask you, with this structure, did you impose, was it like a blueprint and you imposed it, or did it somehow start to organically grow within the book?
I have this feeling that we sometimes, as creative people, we think that the only way to move a reader through a book is by using plot. Towards the end of the chapter, you never know what happened next, that kind of thing. Like kind of blunt tools to create, just to keep the reader's interest alive. And I've always felt that those tools feel a little bit blunt, and they don't really work for me as a writer or as a reader. I love books that have a structure that feels true. And in all my books, I've tried to aim for, rather than kind of existing structures, I've tried to invent my own structure. So in this book, I just turned 40, I was in my early 40s, and I had this feeling that time was continuously speeding up. I just, when I was 15, I remember a summer holiday taking place. I mean, it felt like it was 6 months of like being off from school and nothing happened, and still, like time was so slow. And now when I think of this past summer, it felt like it took like 3 hours. And then, so time seems to go speeding up. So I thought about that, and I wondered, like, I wonder what that would look like in a book. Like, that's a great thing if you want to write. Just think, what would this look like on the page? Okay, so I guess that must mean that I'm following these characters over the course of, the first section takes place over the course of 1 year. So we meet the sisters 1 year, and then 6 months. And the next book is 3 months, 1 month, 1 week, 1 day, and 1 minute. So I'm trying to capture what I feel on the inside on the page. And if that works, I mean, it seems to be working because people are reading the book. It is not because I've been sitting in my office going like, that's not how it works. It works because we kind of feel similar. There's some kind of truth there. Yeah, as we age, time speeds up, and the book seems to be saying, yeah, you're not crazy. This is what happens, and then you're going to die. To end on a light note, just a gentle reminder. No, but I'm also Swedish, so I have to keep reminding you that it will happen. But like so that is something that we all know, but we can't think about too much. But then the work of one of the things that our books should do is to remind us of that and to honor that. The fact that we're kind of, we're walking around in these kind of disposable packages that are our bodies. And I think that's also part of why I love to write so much, because there is this, at least theoretically, the things that we write will be around when we're not.
Maybe. Well, where are we for time?
Yes, so
We've got maybe another 10 minutes if you want to read, and then we'll get some questions. And the book signing and sales will be back in the parlor. I get to talk.
Yeah, should we do that?
Okay.
I will stand over here.
You both can work. Microphones.
Oh, okay.
Podiums.
Okay. Is this good? So I will tell you that I started the novel during COVID, and my family, we were in Vermont. Oh my goodness. Yeah, we were in Vermont, and my daughter and my husband started watching the movie Inception, and I couldn't follow the plot. And so after about 10 minutes, I said, I'm out. And I went in the other room, and I opened my laptop, and I wrote exactly these words. Here are the ways I could start this story. Olivia was breathtaking. For a long time, I was convinced that she was responsible for everything that went wrong. No one will love you more or hurt you more than a sister. I never thought those words would stay in the book. It was really my throat clearing. So then, as you already know, this wasn't my first scene, but it became my first scene. I was afraid to wake up my dad. He was stretched out on the couch in his den late afternoon, his brown loafers kicked off on the shag carpet, resting on each other like rabbits. This better be good, Amy. He never used my full name. It was Aim or A or Acorn or Bun or Bunny. By the time he reached Ollie, she was soaked in blood. Ollie had dared me to jump on the couch with her, using the thick cushions as a trampoline. She made a swishing sound as she jumped, touching the ceiling and dunking an imaginary basketball. Only when she took a jump shot from the side, not realizing the power in her legs, she crashed into the picture window behind the couch. For a second, there was silence. Then the window splintered into a web of shards that rained down on my sister. She shook her head, and pieces of glass flung like water from a summer sprinkler. She froze in place, afraid to take a step or move. Tiny spots of blood blossomed from beneath her shirt and pants. My father told me to call 911 for an ambulance. Then he soothed Ollie with his deep voice. It's going to be okay. Stay still. Ollie hadn't moved a millimeter, knowing that doing so would push the shards of glass deeper into her skin. Now, in partial shock, she couldn't speak. Later, she would joke that she looked like a giant tampon. And I know that our books are very much about sibling rivalry, so I'll just read one more passage that about the rivalry. Olivia and I fought as if the world existed to fuel our rivalry. We fought over possession of the big chair in front of the television and the remote control. We fought over the window seat on an airplane and at the aisle on the movies. There was no taking turns when it came to sitting in the front seat of the car. As long as I was alive, the younger sister would be relegated to the back seat. Even our mother didn't contest it. We fought over the dog we didn't have, what breed it might be, what to name it, and which of us it loved most. If Ollie thought that I had a larger portion of food, she'd swap our plates. We fought physically, hair pulling, punching, kicking. Far worse was the name calling. The insults she leveled at me that sting to this day. She called me loser, zero, first living abortion. She said I was a brown noser, a teacher's pet, a kiss ass. I was boring, cloying, a below average human. She knew I was an A+ student, but she wasn't talking about grades. In Ollie's view, I had no charisma, no flair. My first tormentor, she was ingenious in keeping her tactics beneath my parents' radar. When we fought, they always said the same things. They didn't care who started it. We should sort it out ourselves. Well, what was there to sort out after Ollie had eaten my dessert and left my beloved markers open to dry, beheaded my dolls? Every year on my birthday, Ollie would push me aside and blow out the candles. My parents would chide her as they laughed, Ollie, but my father would relight the candles, but I would refuse to blow them out or make a wish as the little wax columns melted into the cake. They would tell me to stop being silly, and I was branded the bad sport, while Ollie pushed me aside and stole my wish. So.
So it says here, please adjust microphone. But I don't know if I can pull it out, or does it what was that? It works like this? Perfect, great. So I have a choice. Either I read to you from the sisters, or I can read something that will be published tomorrow, a personal essay about the passing of my father. And I noticed that I should read the personal essay based on your sounds. So I will do that. And we will have 15 minutes for Q&A afterwards. It will be published tomorrow in The Guardian. My father died 8 months ago, and last night he drove me home in a taxi. We knew something was wrong when my father stopped taking his insulin and started leaving his flat at night without his shoes because there were people in the plants and the floor was made of muddy water. After several tests, he was diagnosed with Lewy body dementia, which causes hallucinations and a rapid decline in cognition. He moved to a nursing home in central Stockholm, and I told myself that everything would end well. Dad would finally get proper medication, physical therapy, new teeth, foot care, and eye treatment for his declining vision. I imagined coming by with my sons, and we would finally be able to talk about everything. Why he disappeared, what we might have done differently, and why I still held on to the naive hope that he would apologize. In the first weeks in the home, he would often tell the nurses the story of how he met my mother. He was a 21-year-old Tunisian store detective using his impeccable eyesight to catch shoplifters in a mall in Lausanne, Switzerland. She was an 18-year-old Swedish student secretary who was in the country to learn French. They met at a pub. He quoted Baudelaire. I guess he had a beret, possibly. She went back to Sweden. Years of letters, a reunion in Stockholm. After their first kiss, Dad asked Mom what her family name, Bergman, meant in Swedish. Mountain man, she said. He couldn't believe it. His family name, Khemiri or Khemiri, also meant mountain man, but in Arabic. Cue strings, cue destiny, cue love forever, 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 ever, Andre 3000 boys. Their names connected them in a world that seemed to claim their love was impossible because they didn't share class, background, religion, skin color, and a mother tongue. It wasn't 100% true. Khemiri doesn't literally mean mountain man in Arabic. But my father was from Jendouba, near the Khemiri Mountains, and Khemiri kind of sounds like Khemiri, so I guess it was true enough. My father's most crushing loss was the divorce. When Mom told him he had to move out, Dad cursed me and my brothers. Your mother will never be able to raise three boys on her own, he said. You will end up homeless drug addicts. He disappeared. I spent my life trying to prove him wrong. I became a writer, my middle brother an actor, the youngest a psychiatrist. None of us are homeless. But whenever I've gone through a breakup since, I hear my father's voice, I told you not to trust anyone. After my father moved to the nursing home, I received a writing fellowship in New York and moved to the US with my family. He never forgave me for leaving Sweden. He would call 5 times a day to let me know the nurses were trying to poison him. Mossad had bugged his room. His plants were still full of people, and the muddy water on the floor was rising by the day. He wanted to go to Tunisia, to Paris, to New York. He wanted to be anywhere but there. Nobody has come to see me in weeks, he said, which was strange because I knew my brothers had been there the day before. All I need is some physical presence, he added, which struck me as slightly ironic since all his now grown children had felt the same way when he disappeared. When we hung up, my sons asked me what was wrong with Grandpa, and I tried to explain. I told them he's sick, he's old, he comes from a poor background, a complicated country, has 8 siblings, his mother couldn't read or write. He worked all his life to achieve financial stability. He was convinced money could create freedom and help him escape a painful past he never wanted to talk about. He had 1,000 dreams. Sold watches, imported perfumes, drove subways, bartended, taught languages, always dreaming of that big break that would turn everything around. Did he ever get rich? My oldest son asked. It depends on what you mean by rich, I said. He managed to save some money, but he lost a lot of people along the way. I hugged my sons and promised myself I wouldn't repeat my father's mistakes, knowing full well I would make my own. A few months before his death, he called me to say he was lost in the city. It It was raining, someone had stolen his leather jacket, and he couldn't find his way back to the nursing home. His voice trembled with fear. "If you turn on the camera, I can guide you," I said. It took him a few minutes to find the button. He showed me his surroundings. "But Dad," I said, "you're sitting in your room." "Are you sure?" he said, looking at his walls, his TV, the Tabarka Jazz Festival poster, as if for the first time. A few days before he passed, I was in Paris to give a reading for my latest novel, The Sisters. It follows 3 siblings over 35 years as they try to break free from a family curse. I chose a chapter about a father who forces his son to cut off his hair and then helps a female shopkeeper who is threatened by a drunk. The chapter ends with this line: "I enjoyed turning my father into a story. Somehow it gave me power over him. It seemed like the only power I had." The next day, my brother texted, "Dad has stopped eating and drinking. The doctors are considering palliative care." I just stood there blinking at the screen, trying to process how utterly powerless my stories were in the face of death. I flew to Stockholm and spent 3 days and nights with my brothers at his bedside. He was breathing but couldn't speak. He was looking at us but didn't recognize us. He looked like a baby bird with thin wings for arms and empty holes where there had once been white teeth. "He can still hear you," the nurses said, and we believed them. We didn't leave his side. We played Sati on repeat. We told stories. Do you remember that time he caught 2 rabbits by hand, killed mosquitoes lurking on the ceiling with towels, pretended to eat a wasp, danced like James Brown, defended us from racist skinheads, quoted Disney films, forgot our girlfriends' names, warned us to never get involved in politics, told us we were crazy for trusting the banking system? Sure, death seemed to be winning. But our stories put up a good fight. Dementia had transformed his mind into a desert, but I imagine our stories planting seeds that might wake him up. Soon terminal lucidity would kick in. Soon he would speak. We kept hoping for an ending that would make sense. One afternoon, we filled the hospital room with people. My mom, my brother's girlfriends, their children, older kids keeping their distance from his stiff body, toddlers climbing into bed without fear, drooling on his yellow face. For a moment, I saw the flutter of a smile on his lips, but still no words. My middle brother was the last one to hear him speak. The day before I arrived, Dad looked up and said, "Tell Per-Olof I still love his daughter." Per-Olof Bergman, my Swedish grandfather, died in 1993. My parents divorced in 1995. My father died in 2025. I've spent 22 years writing about families, perhaps as a rebellion against death. Every time I receive a call telling me someone has died, my brain whispers, "You can write about this." It happened when my first girlfriend took her own life, when a childhood friend died in a car crash, when my grandfather died, and my grandmother, and my cousin, and my uncle. For years, I felt guilty about that reflex. Now I see it as a defense mechanism, an illusion of control. Don't worry, you're not powerless. You can come up with an evocative first sentence and an effective ending. You can turn your loss into words and replace everyone who dies with sentences. And on some levels, we all do this. We lose, and we tell stories. We tell stories, and then we die. The best case scenario is that time kills us. No wonder we search frantically for control, for narrative structure, for a happy ending. But sitting next to my dying father, I didn't think about writing, maybe because I'd already mourned him. Once he told me, "Everything you have, you got from me. You wouldn't be a writer without me." I think he was right. But I suspect his absence shaped me more than his presence. His breaths grew shallow. We said our goodbyes. We forgave him. We cried. We waited. We waited some more. We said goodbye, at least 8 times. At 2:30 a.m. the third night, his breathing slowed. I woke my brothers. We sat beside him. His forehead was cold. Long silences. Then another breath. Silence, breath. Silence, breath. Then silence. A brief moment of pain, a gurgling sound, silence. He didn't wake up to say he loved us. He didn't explain why things turned out the way they did. He breathed, and then he stopped. After his death, I flew to Tunisia to collect letters, photos, and meet mourning cousins and aunts. Even though he was gone, I kept seeing him everywhere. He drove every car, stood behind every bar. The security guard who told me the mosque in Tunis was closing had his eyes. The bald man who tried to lure me down an alley in a souk had his hands and homemade tattoos. My aunt had his smell, my uncle his laughter. I had never been to Tunisia without him, and my brain wouldn't allow him to die. Back in New York, he appeared less often. In April, a young version of him sold halal food on 47th Street. In June, a middle-aged version refereed my son's flag football game in New Jersey. Didn't the referee look like your grandfather? I asked on our way home. My son had headphones on and didn't respond. My father died 8 months ago, and last night he drove me home in a taxi. I leaned forward to see if it was really him. Same neck, same hair, same shoulders. But when we hit a pothole on Flatbush Avenue, he turned to me and said, "Sorry."
I had one, actually, if I could abuse my power. You mentioned your Swedish publisher asking what to do with the book you wrote in English, and you said, it struck me, you said, I could write it again. You didn't say I could translate it. And that really struck me, and I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about that.
Thank you for that. Yeah, thank you for being brave and asking the first question. I don't think I could have translated it. I asked an older writer, the book is so much about time. Translating myself feels like I'm being sucked back into time. And then he said, well, think about other great writers who kept going back and forth between different languages. And he mentioned a writer who I really loved when I was younger, called Nabokov. He wrote in Russian and English, and he kept thinking of whenever he wrote a new version of a book in English or in Russian, he would think of it as a new draft, and that unlocked something in me. Because if you're creating a new draft, as you all know, you can make it better. So I was not a translator. I was a translator who was looking kind of at my own text as a first draft. So I changed a lot of things, basically. So I was still free. So I rewrote the whole book, and I was very happy. And then it was published in Sweden. And then my American publisher was like, wait a minute, who now will translate it back? And then I did this, then I actually translated it back. Yeah, I just locked the door to my office, drank a lot of coffee, and did it. And that was the only part of the process that was not enjoyable, because I was not free. I was not free to change things, yeah.
Do we get the translated version, or do we get the original English?
Here you can only buy the Japanese version. No, here you get the English version. I mean, one question that often comes up is like, what's the original version?
Yeah.
And I don't know. What if the idea that we can find one simple truth, one authentic version is fake? So maybe the real version is I don't know, the Korean version. Maybe there's not one authentic version, but I want to say, like, if I were to choose, I read in English and in Swedish. I would choose the English version because these sisters spoke to me in English. They did a thing that I did when I was young. You know, they are born and raised in Sweden like I was, but they speak English to signal to everyone around them that they're not really from here. You know, and I think that I think we all have strategies that we can use from times. I mean, even in Brattleboro, like, I'm not a real Brattleboro person. Like, there are other things going on. Like, you know that thing that we can use language to signal some kind of distance? These sisters do something similar. And I did that when I was young too. I was born and raised in Stockholm, but I didn't feel at home there. So I would basically use English as as a safety blanket, almost.
So the versions that are published in other countries, which version do they use to translate?
Great question. They use both. And then with my translators, I always have a long Word document with collected questions and answers. So I think they actually use both. Yeah. They need a big computer screen.
Any other questions before we rush out to buy books at Amazon? Yes.
Susan, are you aware that your high school English teacher is here to greet you and celebrate your success and hers? And by the way, she says that you were not a brown noser.
Is that Myra? I have to tell you that Myra Fassler had us over to her home to read poetry. And I think 3 of us showed up. And I don't know if you remember this, Myra, but you had us come up to your bedroom to watch Baryshnikov dance. Do you remember that? Well, it was a little black and white TV, and he leapt through the air, and you said, "Kids, that's poetry in motion." Really, I can't believe you're here. You are really why I write poetry and why I write. So amazing. Thank you. I have to give you a hug.